Thanks, Acting Speaker, and I rise to speak in support of the Cladding Safety Victoria Repeal Bill 2026, and I do respond to the member for Bulleen's comments in regard to that this bill is quite quizzical, and he did repeat on numerous occasions that the job is not done, but I just have to remind him as he walks out of the chamber that the opposition are not opposing this bill, so they clearly must think the job is done. But anyway, we'll move on. I'd like to use this moment to reflect on the journey that brought us to this moment, and one that started in the early hours of November morning in the Melbourne Docklands, and of course in November 2014, 11 to 12 years ago, Victorians watched in horror as the La Crosse Tower in Melbourne Docklands was engulfed in flames. Non-compliant aluminium composite cladding ignited by one single cigarette, and it sent fire racing up 13 stories. Of course, our fantastic Melbourne Fire Brigade crews responded to the reported fire at the multi-storey apartment building and on La Trobe Street in the Docklands. And of course, when they arrived, it only took them 5 minutes to attend to that incident, and fire had already spread through a further 6 floors above the room that was ignited. And within just 11 minutes of the fire starting, it had reached above the 21st floor. Of course, as I earlier said, the cause of the fire was a cigarette butt on the balcony, but it was the building's non-compliant external cladding that turned a small fire into a major emergency, allowing flames to travel rapidly and vertically through the building and penetrating multiple apartments along the way. Of course, there were 400 residents, many of them students, were safely evacuated from the building, and that's a testament to the incredible work of our emergency services and, of course, the 120 firefighters that attended that fire and the 22 vehicles that worked to bring the blaze under control in around 30 minutes, which was quite amazing given the significance of the fire. And I thank those firefighters for doing such a great job and saving all of the people that were in that building. And it was a remarkable response, but the speed and the scale of what unfolded that night laid bare just how dangerous non-compliant cladding truly was. And ultimately what it did reveal was the work that this government needed to do, and that's what's before us. The blaze was visible from across the city, and by extraordinary good luck, no lives were lost, but the images seared into our collective memory. And of course, if you don't have memories of this event, I encourage you to check the documentation online, the photos that go some ways to capturing the horror, and it's something that we never ever want to see again, and hence that Cladding Safety Victoria was created. Most of us have memories of seeing building fires, and whether it's in our professional capacities like the member for Pakenham, the member for Werribee or Bass, as members of their local CFAs, and of course the member for Frankston as his FRV firefighter. Well, you saw fires, didn't you? And yeah, that's right. So, and they did great work in regard to responding to emergency calls, and we thank them for their efforts, not only in the CFA but also as their former careers as firefighters, and it's fantastic. And of course, every fire is a life-changing event, no matter how big or small. And as a government, we're compelled to act and to make sure that our communities are safe. Hence, again. And of course, the MFB post-incident analysis of this fire handed down in April of 2015 confirmed that what many in the industry had feared, and that was that the non-compliant cladding or aluminium composite panelling had materially contributed to the fires that rapidly spread through that building down at the Docklands. Of course, while the appropriate use of external wall cladding was addressed in the Building Code of Australia, compliance had clearly fallen through the cracks, and this raised the troubling question of how many other buildings across Victoria were in the same position. And of course, Victorians deserved, our community deserved answers on this. And in 2016, the Victorian Building Authority launched the result of their major audit of building permits. And of course, out of that, more than half did not comply with the cladding regulations. That's right, more than half. and that was what was found. And I think today we're still shocked by that. And of course, the next year, at just before 1 a.m. on the 14th of June 2017, we saw a fire broke out in the kitchen area of a fourth floor apartment at the 23-storey tower block in North Kensington, West London. And of course, that tragedy was watched by many millions of people around the world as we watched the London's Grenfell Tower burn, and the tragedy of those people in that fire. And of course, the analysis there, what ignited that fire was a fridge freezer in the fourth floor apartment. And despite a rapid response from fire crews, there were many, as I say, it was a tragedy. There were many lives lost in that fire. I think there was over 72 lives lost in that fire, which was so traumatic, and to watch the footage of it was so horrific. Of course, it was a simple tragedy, and it was a catastrophe and a consequence of systemic failures across the board by developers, by builders, by regulators, and by gaps in government policy accumulated over many, many years. The most significant part of the renovation of the Grenfell Tower was the addition of external cladding of aluminium sheets bonded to a central plastic polyethylene core. And of course, in the report about that to the public inquiry, Professor Luke Bisbee said evidence strongly supports that the theory that polyethylene material in the cladding was the primary cause of the fire's spread. And of course, 72 victims were failed, and their deaths were 100% preventable. And this is exactly what we tried to do here in Victoria, in making sure that our buildings were safe from this highly inflammable material, this cladding material on many, many of our buildings, and the removal of that cladding so we wouldn't see another episode of what happened in Kensington. Of course, in 2019, a fire at the Neo 200 building on Spencer Street in Melbourne had eerie similarities to the Grenfell disaster. But fortunately, no one lost their lives, of course. And residential buildings are particularly vulnerable to the effects of the cladding fires because people can be asleep and windows are often left open. And of course, the amount of smoke generated by the Neo 200 fire was frightening, and over 350 buildings in Melbourne were rated very high risk. And the Neo 200 was regarded as only a moderate risk. But of course, Grenfell and the Cross stand as a permanent and sobering reminder of what is at stake when we allow non-compliance to go unchecked in our built environment. But 10 years on from the La Crosse fire, flammable cladding fires continue to occur around the world. And progress on the systemic reforms recommended in the wake of these tragedies has been far too slow. And these events, both at La Crosse and at Grenfell, were the well-needed wake-up call that shaped what followed here in Victoria. And of course, the VBA audit, the Labor government established the Victorian Cladding Task Force, and they charged with investigating the true extent of non-compliant external wall cladding on buildings throughout our state. And of course, the task force findings and recommendations were the foundation upon which private residential cladding rectification program was established in July of 2019. I just want to give a shout out to the CSV, and I'll come to that in a minute, which was created. I just want to take the opportunity to sincerely thank the chairperson, Rod Ferring, Deputy Chairperson, Sarah Clark, the entire CSV board, CEO, Dan O'Brien, and every member of the CSV team for their dedication, expertise and tireless commitment to keeping Victorians safe. And of course, their work has been genuinely world-leading, and I know that we have a lot of eyes watching us with interstate and international agencies, other governments and other departments all paying close attention. And by the time the CSV concludes its work, it will have delivered safety improvements to over 1,660 buildings across Victoria, keeping many, many Victorians safe and shielding hundreds of thousands of residents from both physical harm and crippling financial burden of self-funded rectification. So the work that they've done has been amazing, and hence the repeal of this bill. It is a good law, it protects Victorians, and it's rewarded diligence, and it reflects the kind of government action that makes a real and lasting difference to people's lives. This was good work done, and I commend the bill to the House.